The next Action Hub event will be starting in 5 minutes. Please make your way to your seats. We would like to remind you not to move furniture and respect social distancing at all times. The next Action Hub event will be starting in 1 minute. Please take your seat and switch your phone to silent. If you don't have a seat, we invite you to watch the event online on the UNFCCC website or on the COP platform, but please do not stand on the side of the Action Hub.
Hi there. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Clover Hogan. I'm a 22-year-old climate activist and the founder and executive director of Force of Nature, who you see here today. We are a global youth nonprofit mobilizing mindsets for climate action. Now, what does that actually mean? So we believe that the threat, even greater than the climate crisis, is how powerless we can feel in the face of it. Much of our work at Force of Nature revolves around the rise of eco-anxiety, particularly present in young people. Feelings of despair, frustration, anger that can emerge in the face of the climate and ecological crises that we have inherited. Now, research that we conducted, talking to young people from around the world in over 50 countries, showed us that over 70% of those young people not only felt eco-anxious, but felt hopeless about the future that we're inheriting. Of those young people, only 26% of them felt that they could meaningfully contribute to solving the problem. We recently contributed to an even larger study, talking to 10,000 young people across 10 countries. Of that research, we found that over 56% of young people feel that the future is doomed. This can come as such a shock when we think of young people as feeling empowered and impassioned and determined to create change. We are all of those things, but we are also grieving. We are also experiencing enormous amounts of pain and enormous amounts of despair. So today we have curated this conversation in this session to create space for those difficult climate emotions. Now, we are not only self-proclaimed experts in eco-anxiety because we talk about this a lot and because we research it, but because we're young people who are eco-anxious. And so I invite everyone in this room today to create space for yourself to connect to those feelings, to not shy away from them, and together we can find connectedness and community in those emotions. Now today I'm joined by three of my wonderful colleagues. We have another one with the bright orange hair in the front row, Kathleen Hamilton. I'm joined by Sasha Wright, our community and research coordinator, Alejandra Arias, our communications director, and Phoebe Hansen, our operations director. With that, I'm going to take a seat and hand over to Alejandra to help us all ground and be present in this space. Thank you.
Hi, welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. I'd like to invite everyone here to just take a moment and come into your body. So if you'd like to place your feet on the ground solidly, and if you'd like, if you feel comfortable, you can close your eyes, or if that's a little too intense for you, you can just keep them softly gazing at the floor in front of you. And just take a moment to check in. How is your body feeling? What's going on inside of you? And maybe bringing your shoulders just over your hips and slightly tucking your chin. Taking a deep breath in and just feel that life coming into your body. And again, checking in and noticing how that feels. When you take your next breath, this time, as you exhale, really noticing the soles of your feet connected and rooted to the earth. Feel the support of the ground beneath you, of the earth. And know that whatever you're feeling, whatever's going on inside of you right now is being fully held, fully embraced by the earth beneath you. So taking one last deep breath in. And as you exhale, just start slowly opening up your eyes, maybe looking around the room and just acknowledging the other human beings around you, maybe just welcoming each other with a friendly eye gaze. Thank you. And I'll pass it over to you, Sasha.
Thank you so much, Alejandra, for the gentle reminder to check in with ourselves. I'm going to kick off today's session by asking the room the same question that we start every single one of our workshops with at Force of Nature. And that's the question, how does the climate crisis make you feel? And I'll invite you guys to respond. Say a word. Anybody? Stressed, I hear. Angry, overwhelmed. Despair. Emotional, yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to ask my colleague, Phoebe, what has your experience of eco-anxiety been?
So I grew up in Blackpool, which for anyone who's not from the UK is a very urban seaside town in the UK. We're at the top of all of the leadership boards just for all the bad things, all the worst things. We are the most deprived area in all of the UK. So I didn't have access to nature being in that urban environment. The only access to nature that I did have was what I like to call manufactured nature. So we'd go on a day out to the Lake District and see these manufactured nature spaces, and I loved it. And we did that because it was a free activity, and that was all that we could really spend our Saturdays and Sundays doing. So I realised that being from the UK, I have climate privilege. I am in a bubble of relative climate privilege to the frontline communities, but I also don't have the privilege to have worried about the climate crisis. And it wasn't until I was 18, I went to university, that was when I first started to experience eco-anxiety. So I studied sustainability and the environment. And for the first couple of years, it was absolutely incredible. I learned about the complexities of the earth, all of the natural systems, all the societies around the world that I grew to love. And then in my final year of university, something changed, something clicked inside me, and I started to feel overwhelmed and hopeless and sad. I'd avoid going to lectures because I couldn't deal with what they were telling me. I was walking into lectures, they were telling me, here's the state of the world, here's the state of your society, but they were giving me no tools on how to deal with that. I was given no infrastructure on how to navigate those feelings, and I was given no spaces to feel empowered to actually make a difference. And that was something that when I spoke to my peers, we all felt the same. I didn't know at the time it was eco-anxiety, but now I do. We know that, as Clover said, 70% of young people feel eco-anxiety. They have experienced eco-anxiety. And a recent research report found that of 10,000 young people that were surveyed in 10 countries, 56% of young people feel like humanity is doomed. Now, they're big numbers. That shouldn't be taken lightly. But the thing is, a lot of this anxiety that comes around from the climate crisis, it's not necessarily in how broken our planet is, and it's more about how powerless we feel in the face of it, how powerless we as young people feel to actually support and solve that crisis. I implore you to, next time you're in a room at this conference, I really appreciate the fact that you're here to listen to youth voices, but look around you and see who's missing from that room. Can you see young faces? Can you see young voices being heard? Because quite often we're not. Vulnerable communities, young people, frontline communities, we're the people that are always left out of these decision-making rooms. And when we are invited into these decision-making rooms, are we being listened to? For example, yesterday evening, just yesterday, I went to another event, and the CEO of Bezos Earth spoke. And they were incredibly problematic and incredibly damaging in everything that they were saying. They were supporting what we know to be critically unjust corporations. They were failing to recognize the responsibility that they have as an industry with that big corporate giant. I won't say the name, you all know who I'm talking about. And they trivialized the meaningful action that we can take, the things around our dietary choices, that kind of thing. And then straight after that session, I was feeling incredibly just overwhelmed and disempowered by that. It was awful. Straight after that, 2 Amazonian indigenous leaders were invited onto the stage, and they were the most incredible people I've ever heard speak. They were amazing, they were inspiring, and I was so hopeful that those people had been invited onto the stage. However, after I'd got over that inspiration, I found myself emotionally breaking down. I was sobbing at the thought of this juxtaposition between this person saying that we should have people in these spaces, we should have the right people in these spaces, And then the right people were invited onto the stage, but it was like none of the room were listening. In that space, I shared no lived experience with those leaders, but in that space, as a young person who's been left out of decision-making rooms, they were the people that I felt like I related to most, which is abhorrent. So I want to be vulnerable with you, and I want you to be vulnerable with yourselves, with people that you're not usually vulnerable with. Explore those climate emotions. As Sasha said, something that we always ask people at the beginning of a classroom is, how does this make you feel? Because nobody is asked that. I'll land on this. Recently, a peer asked me a really profound question, which I didn't realize was so impactful until I really thought about it. And they just said to me and some of my fellow climate activists, if you weren't here, if you weren't in the climate space, I have the privilege of working for the planet and not dying under it, but if you weren't here doing this, what would you be doing? What would you be spending your time doing? What would your career be? What would your life look like? And I didn't know how to answer that because I haven't allowed myself to imagine anything else for myself in 10 years. I haven't imagined being a baker, being a singer, all these things that I would have loved to have done because I feel this moral obligation to stand for young people and those historically left out of these rooms. And I've disallowed myself to think of a different future where I can be a baker, I can be a singer, because I don't want to disappoint myself. So that's how eco-anxiety shows up for me in my life. But Alejandra, I'd love to hear how it shows up for you in your life, what your experience of eco-anxiety is.
I feel like that always depends on the day that you ask that question. For me, eco-anxiety is a process. It's never sort of a final destination or just a static emotion. It's very fluid and it moves through you. Emotion in the word itself means energy in motion, in your body, constantly moving and transforming. So it definitely varies day to day, and it depends on the people I surround myself with, the information that I take in, and also what I'm doing. And for me, personally, I feel eco-anxiety. It becomes a very visceral experience in my body, which is why I really asked you all today to check in with how your body is feeling, because we're surrounding ourselves. It's a really intense time, and we have to feel that in our bodies as well. When we tap into that emotion and that visceral feeling inside, we can understand on a very deeper level what's going on in our surroundings and in our environment. I feel for myself that our emotions are portals to transformation, and it requires us to step in and to be curious about what we're feeling and also where are we going. We often, and I myself often also find that I can very easily get stuck into the identity of an emotion, whether it's anger or whether it's stress, despair, and even happiness. And it's a very human thing to want to just stay in that and have that become part of your identity. But I feel like a lot of what we need in the world today is being fluid in our emotions and allowing that to change day to day and from space to space and from person to person. So really encourage you to sit, and I always tell this to myself every morning, just to sit with yourself and notice how you're feeling, journal it down, and over time you see that you're not just one fixed emotion, one fixed identity, one fixed person, but you're constantly transforming, and that's really what we need to kind of take forward into our lives and in our worlds. It's to allow the transformation. A lot of the pain and the suffering that we experience is because we're resisting the transformation that's very naturally occurring in our environments. And nature is showing us through climate change and through the crisis that's happening, it's showing us that it wants change. Are we listening? Are we listening to the change and transformation that wants to occur within us? And are we stepping into it? So I'd love to know from you, Sasha, you've spoken to thousands of young people through your work at Force of Nature. And what are the stories, what are the emotions that you're feeling?
That's a really great question, and I think I would love to frame it as what have I learned from the young people that I've had the privilege to speak with. The voices, they all change. They're massively diverse, but there are some universal messages that really have come through to me, and I think to all of us in our work. The first thing I want to say is I hear you guys, and I see myself reflected in some of those experiences, and especially in some of those stories. I'm a scientist at heart. I grew up learning about nature as our greatest asset and the playground that I would play on. But I went into an environmental science degree, which I ended up graduating from actually about 3 weeks ago. And I remember walking out of classes in my second and third year about failing biodiversity, crop loss, wildfires, feeling like I was literally wearing iron shoes, feeling so unbelievably dispassionate about the life that I was inheriting. It removed me so much from the reality of the issue, and I think that so often we're told to play audience to a story about our future. We're told that in order to meaningfully engage with the issue, we need to vaccinate ourselves against those emotions. We can't be both humans and addressing the problems. When I started at Force of Nature, I felt like I was allowed to let out a breath that I had been holding for years. I thought, oh my God, I'm actually allowed to feel something. I'm actually allowed to grieve or be angry or be upset, and I'm allowed to ask other people how they feel as well. I want to talk about 3 messages that I've kind of learned or developed through our work at Force of Nature. And the first is that eco-anxiety is a perfectly rational response to the depth of the crisis. I think we would be numbing ourselves if we felt nothing in the face of the 6th mass extinction, in the face of wildfires. My God, I drove through Canada, my home country, this summer and witnessed towns razed to the ground. I have license to grieve, and we all have license to grieve or be angry. The second message is that eco-anxiety doesn't just look one way. In fact, as Alejandra said, as you said, it's different depending on the day that we ask ourselves or one another about it. And it's hope and urgency and grief and anger and despair, all in the exact same breath, in the same moment. And all of these emotions, instead of making us vulnerable or weak, are actually key components of the resilience that we build to step up to the crisis. I was in the New York Times Climate Hub yesterday, and every person that walked past me, I asked that same question. How does the climate crisis make you feel? And I've learned you actually have to ask that twice. Because the first time people are like, oh, it's okay, you know, I'm worried. And it's like, no. How do you feel? And all of a sudden, it was like something was unlocked. Nobody had ever asked them that question before. And all of a sudden it was, actually, I'm really worried about my kids. My daughter's really stressed out. She comes to me. I'm worried about my future. I'm scared. I'm angry at myself. I feel guilty. I hear that all the time. I feel guilty. And that's heavy. So the third lesson that I would leave you all with is that eco-anxiety is not the issue. How we feel is not the issue, but rather it's what we do with those feelings, how we build community around them, how we empower ourselves with them, how we reach out to others, how we show vulnerability, but through that vulnerability we build strength. That is what the important thing is. So at COP, I think we need to give ourselves license to feel, because those feelings are actually what make us powerful vessels for change. At COP, what we wanted to do is create safe spaces for people to talk about how the climate crisis makes them feel, and critically, how we can take those feelings and channel them into action. And that's why we have community. That's why I'm so pleased to be sitting on this stage with my colleagues. It's so that when we can't find our way, when we experience that ebb and flow of motivation, as we all should as humans, we have hands to grab at ours and show us the way forward. Clover, I'd love if you spoke a little bit about the space that we've created at COP.
Absolutely. I'm so dang proud, sat alongside my amazing colleagues. I think there is such power in sitting in these difficult climate emotions. And there is still so much stigma around mental health in the climate crisis. There's this tremendous pressure to be okay all the time, to be switched on, particularly for young people when so much of the narrative is, we're being handed the baton of the future to show up and feel empowered and channel our anger. And, sometimes I don't want to get out of bed. I want to binge Netflix on the couch. I want to think about anything other than climate because it can feel so overwhelming. And yet, as each of my colleagues spoke to, wrapped up in those difficult climate emotions are the beautiful feelings of hope and determination and positivity, a celebration of all the life that is left and all that we have to fight for. I think at this COP, we recognize, this being COP26, might I remind everyone, that we have had the technology, resources, solutions, ingenuity to solve the climate crisis for many decades. In fact, we've had knowledge of the climate crisis for decades before any of us were born. And yet, critically, what we've lacked is this mass mobilization of mindset. And for us, creating space for these feelings, giving ourselves license to sit in the pain and the discomfort of what we're inflicting upon the planet and what we're inflicting upon ourselves is the most powerful catalyst that we do have for change. Now at Force of Nature, we conduct classrooms, workshops with young people around the world to create space for those difficult feelings. And yet we can't let the conversation stop there. We're also working tirelessly to create pathways for young people to go from banner blazing in the street to walking the corridors of power. And so what we're doing now is creating spaces for young people within policy, within business, to have a seat at the table and to share those difficult emotions, and critically, by sitting in those emotions, create mindset shifts in the people who sit in historic seats of power. Something remarkable that we've heard in every boardroom we've sat in, from world leaders and decision makers, is that they're not sat there talking to a bunch of 20-year-olds about the climate crisis because of the IPCC report or because of another doomsday headline, but because their child has come home to them at the end of the day, sharing their eco-anxiety, and asked, "Mom, Dad, what are you doing about the climate crisis?" So once again, I encourage everyone here to not try to run away from those admittedly difficult climate emotions, but to give space to them and to find the gifts in those feelings, because those gifts are proof that we are awake to the issues, that we feel empathy, and unlike a lot of people in seats of power, we are not numbing ourselves to the crisis. Now, at Force of Nature, as Sasha mentioned, we wanted to create space for people to check in with those difficult climate emotions. And so we launched a campaign called Call Your Mother. And the idea is we wanted to create space where you could have a conversation with Mother Earth, as you might call up your own mum, and be honest, be vulnerable, sit in those difficult feelings. You might have seen some of these posters plastered all up around Glasgow over the past week. But we've created an online space, as well as a huge pop-up phone booth, where you can actually record your message. If you visit callyourmother.earth, you will be directed to a space that is safe for you to open up and share. And critically, to connect to the voices of other people around the world who are in these spaces, but also who are not in these spaces, and hear how one another are feeling. There are 3 options. You can have a check-in, you can have a bit of a rant, I know I need one, or you can send a message to those in power. And I'd invite everyone now, if you haven't already engaged in our beautiful phone booth, to scan the QR code that is up on the screen. It'll direct you to callyourmother.earth, and from there you can record a message. Now I'd like to invite my colleagues, if you have any parting words to the audience today, as we carry on, as we carry the baton of COP26 and navigate our way through some of these difficult emotions.
I can say something.
Oh, go on, you go first. I'd rather
Cut you off.
This part was clearly planned.
I would say that something that I hear from a lot of young people is, as you mentioned, there's a lot of stigma around their mental health and around how they feel. A lot of them say, I don't always want to be, the young person in the room, bringing up all the trouble, bringing up all the problems. I don't want to be the downer amongst my peers or in my family. The most powerful thing that we can do is to lead by example. I know that I didn't give myself license to feel the strong feelings until I saw it from Clover, our founder, and Alejandra, our comms director, and Phoebe from you. You guys give me the license and the space to express those emotions. So I would say for each of you to do the same thing to the people in your life. Give them the space to have those feelings and invite them, whatever they may be, urgency, grief, despair, anger, and hold those emotions with great care, because they are what make those people really powerful.
Yeah, I think we need to be having difficult conversations with the young people in our life, whether it be your nieces, your nephews, your neighbours, your children. Quite often we're not invited to just open up about our feelings, and we're not invited to think about how does a climate crisis actually make us feel. Quite often we're seen on the streets, honestly out of desperation, out of anger, out of not being able to have our voices heard. Those feelings are in 70% of young people. So please do go home, explore those feelings with the people that you love in your life, because they will find that space invaluable, and as will you, because you will be able to then also explore how you're feeling about the climate crisis. Are you feeling shut down? Are you feeling anxious? Are you feeling hopeless? And how can we create a space where we all feel empowered to take action and ensure that the right people are not only invited into the right spaces and the right discussions, but heard in those spaces and in those discussions?
And I think critically as well, when we listen to those statistics, our most quoted statistics at Force of Nature are 70% of young people feel powerless and 26% know how to meaningfully make a difference. But in our workshops and all of our programs, that is not the end of the story. That is the beginning of the story. That's where we start. And I think there should be an ellipsis or a suspension point there where we then ask, okay, now what? And that's what we all need to ask ourselves. Okay, I feel this, now what? Yeah. Now, how am I moving forward? How am I creating space forward for myself through these difficult emotions?
I'd like to just say, I think Sasha just highlighted that it is a process, and as Phoebe said, definitely talk to young people, talk to your family members, but also I'd like you to talk to your inner child and to the young person inside of you and uplift that voice. We are all children of the earth. We're all beings on this earth, and there is a voice inside that needs to be shared.
With that, I would also encourage all of you to call your mother, whatever mother means to you. It could be your actual mom, it could be a friend, it could be a safe space, it could be a song. But call your mother, let her know how you feel, and connect to yourself. Thank you, everybody.
That brings us to the end of our session on eco-anxiety. Thank you all so much for creating the space. You can find us. We're very brightly colored, as you can see. We'd love to chat to you, and we'd love to think about other ways that we can bring eco-anxiety into the mainstream, and critically how we can turn it into agency. So thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you for attending. The event is now over. Please vacate the Action Hub so our team can clean the room.